This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
On the holy subject of entering the Habayis, Bizman Hazeh, whether it is permitted, what is the Kedushas Hamakim Bizman Hazeh. Let's review in 2 minutes what we learned last week, and we'll take it from there. The Mishnayos and Kalim said there are 10 levels of Kedusha, and the Machon Leviyah begins at the Habayis. And in the Machon Leviyah, meaning on the Habayis, a Zav, a Zava, a Nida, a Yerledes, a Balkari cannot enter. Which would mean that one who is a Balkari, one who had any type of emission or relations, unless they go to the mikvah, cannot enter the entire Habayis. So we said, so then just go to the mikvah. So that's easy to take care of. You could just go to the mikvah. But the Mishnah continues that the Chel, a Tamei Meis, cannot go into. Now, a Tamei Meis could enter the rest of the Habayis, but the Chel, the Tamei Meis. So you say, so we won't go into the Chel. We'll figure out where the Chel is, and we won't go into the Chel. By the way, further on, the Ezras Nashim, a Tfol Yoim cannot go into, which means Tfol Yoim is somebody who went to the mikvah and did not have Harev Shemesh. Fine. Also, the Ezras Yisrael, if somebody was a Zav and went to a mikvah, a Mechusar Kippurim cannot go into the Ezras Yisrael. But the question we dealt with is, but now that the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, does the Makom still have Kedusha? That was the primary subject we dealt with last week. So we basically said there are 3 Shitas in the Rishonim. Shitas HaRambam is Kitcha Rishayna, Kitcha L'Shaita, Kitcha L'Asal Lavai when it comes to Kedushas HaMikdash, because Kedushas HaMikdash is dependent on the Shechina, Ve'Shechina La'olam La'batla, and therefore, according to the Rambam, someone who enters an area, a machna, that they're not allowed to, for example, if a Balkari enters the Habayis, or if a Tamei Meis enters the Chel, or a Mechusar Kippurim enters as a Yisrael, according to the Rambam, Bizman Hazeh Chayev Kares. Then you have the Shitas HaRavid. The Ravid said the Rambam made this whole thing up. The Rambam, according to the Ravid, the Rambam is not correct. And according to the Ravid, there is no Chiyuv Kares to enter the Machon Maggid Harakiah today. However, points out Rav Yitzchak HaKohen Cook and others that the Ravid doesn't mean there's no Isser D'Oraisa. There still is an Isser D'Oraisa. It's just not, there's no Chiyuv Kares. And the Shita of the Ramban is Bo Pritzim B'Chilaluha. Once the Goyim came to the Machon Maggid Harakiah, the Kedusha left, and it is Mutter L'Chachila to enter there today. And the question is, who do we paskin like? So we brought that the Mishnah Brura himself, none other than the Mishnah Brura, paskins like Shitas HaRambam. The Magen Avram, also quoted in number 19, paskins like the Rambam. In fact, the Likutei Halachos of the Mishnah Brura is matmiya on the Magen Avram. Why does the Magen Avram say the Rambam says you're chayav kares? The overwhelming majority of the Rishonim say you're chayav kares. Be it as it may, the consensus of the Rav Rishonim is Kitcha Rishayna, Kitcha L'Shaita, Kitcha L'Asad Lavai, and somebody who enters the Habayis, either a Balkari or a Zav who enters the Chel, a Zav who enters the Habayis, or a Tamei Meis who enters the Chel, we paskin, you're chayiv kares. Okay, very good. That's where we're up to from last week. So you say, no problem. Balkari, who can't enter the Habayis, you go to the mikvah. You go to a mikvah, a kosher mikvah, it's not a problem. Don't tell me the reason I can't go to the Habayis is because of Balkari, because that, the same way we go to the mikvah Erev Yom Kippur, Erev Rosh Hashanah, or those who are makbid on Tfilas Ezra, so we'll go to the mikvah, and we should be allowed entrance to Habayis. Elamai, we're all Tamei Mesim, fine, so I won't go to the Chel. So we'll figure out where the Chel was, and we just won't go to there. What's this whole business? Is it just a bunch of kanoos not to go to the Habayis? I mean, you can't go because you're Tamei. Well, we're intelligent people. Why am I Tamei? Balkari, go to the mikvah. Tamei Meis, I won't go to the Chel. Don't just put a uniform Isser. The Habayis is the holiest place in the world. If I could daven in a shul, why not daven in the Habayis? So that's what we want to get to, the bottom line. What is the ultimate reason why we don't go to the Habayis today? And when you walk out of the shiur today, do not, if somebody asks, why don't we go to the Habayis, do not say because we're Tamei Meis. Because that only precludes us from going to the Chel. But the rest of the area, a Tamei Meis is allowed to go to. Okay, and the answer is going to be, one of the reasons will be obvious and Parsha, and one of them will be somewhat of a chiddush. And the more chiddush reason is what we're going to focus on first. Okay, number 23. That's where we begin. So comes the Tzitz Eliezer in Chelek Yud Siman Aleph Ois Nun Vav, which is a continuation of number 16. These are tshuvos that the Tzitz Eliezer wrote in 67 once the Habayis and Yerushalayim came back into our hands. And the Tzitz Eliezer quotes the Chazoi Nachum. And that is, we consider ourselves Bizman Hazeh Zovim. And a Zov has to count Shiva Nekiyim and go to the mikvah and wait for Har HaShemesh. And therefore, since we are not Bekiyim in the process of cleansing ourselves from Tumas Zov, therefore we do not go to the Habayis. So you say, what, Tumas Zov? Who ever heard of such a thing that maybe we're Tumas Zov? Balkari, we know what it is, but the Mishnah says one type of emission is like the white of an egg, one is the yellow of the egg. We're choishesh that we're a Zov. I mean, why should we do that? And by the way, Tzitz Eliezer says, therefore, there is no possible way to enter the Habayis, not even through the Bab El Katnin. Does anybody know what the Bab El Katnin is? Good. Yeah, it's the small gate. Which is the small gate? I have no idea. It's the Cotton. I looked it up this morning. It's the Cotton Merchants Gate. It's supposed to be one of the most beautiful gates in Yerushalayim. And I read that during the 19th century, there was no kosel, right? It was covered in dirt. People would gather outside the Bab El Katnin, and that's where they used to daven. It still extant today. But so that would be the typical way to enter to the Habayis. It's the closest gate to the Habayis. Says the Tzitz Eliezer, you're not allowed to go in that way. Why? Says the Tzitz Eliezer, we're really concerned that we're maybe a Zav. He said, yeah. The same way Chazal were goyzer on Amei Ha'aretz, that they have a din of a Zav. Well, if we are not Zahir B'tumah Tahara, and we're not Baki in it, then guess what status we all have today? We're all Amei Haaretz. If we're all Amei Haaretz, we all have a consider. Don't say I'm not a Am Haaretz. Really? Whoever wants to know, we'll give a faher on any blot in Shas, Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos. Okay, that's it. Any blot you want, you could choose it. And then the Tzitz Eliezer says, we'll determine if you're an Am Haaretz or not. Although we're not Bekiyim in Tumah V'Tahara. We all have a status of Am Haaretz, and we're all considered Zavim. So you say, come on, that's not right. I have Smicha, I was a Mitzuyin in Lakewood. Come on, I'm not an Am Haaretz. Says the Tzitz Eliezer another factor. There is a shita. So now here's another thing. If we're a zav, fine. So I'm a zav. I'll go to the mikvah. Now you can't go to any mikvah. You can't even go to a regular kosher women's mikvah. You have to go to a mikvah of Mayim Chayim to remove tumas. So I'll go to Arizal's mikvah or Visionit, whatever it is. They have a mikvah Mayim Chayim, and I'll be toival. No, but you need harav shemesh. So I'll get harav shemesh. I'll wait around. No, but you need shiva nekiyim. Says it Tzitz Eliezer, shiva nekiyim, people cannot count over 5. Once you get past 5, people start getting very confused when it comes to counting. Yeah, but you say I'm an accountant, I'm an actuary. I could keep it together. I could count accurately. If you would know how many women go to a mikvah and they miscalculated because they don't know how to count. They don't have, meaning know how to count means to start the count. When do you start the count? Does the first day count? Does the first day not count? Do you need 7 clean days? Meaning the counting process is somewhat complex. Besides that, and this is the real reason, there is a shita that even if you go to a mikvah of Mayim Chayim, and even if you count, a zav still needs to bring a carbon. So now the zav is a mechusar kippurim. Yeah, but mechusar kippurim of a zav is not like a zav, it's only a mechusar kippurim. Now, where could a mechusar kippurim not go? Only Ezras Yisrael. So I won't go into Ezras Yisrael. No. There is a shita that mechusar kippurim of a zav has Tomaz zav. In deference to that shita, we don't go to the entire Habayis, because since we might be zavim, and we can't bring a carbon, it's a suffix da'iraisa, it's a suffix kares, we can't go to the Habayis. Which one? Counting? No.
You've been on either.
No, the answer is like this. First of all, Bias Nida doesn't make a mamzer, right? Okay, and fine. Plus, Nida Bisman is only Drabanan, so it's not such a big deal. But the point is, he doesn't mean... No, Nida Bisman is Drabanan in 99% of the cases, right? But his point is, now you don't know how to count it. It's a complicated process. When do you start the count? So it's like this. Here's the kid. I know, if somebody learned the halachas, he knows how to count. What do you if you have a chiloni? He says, oh, you went to the mikveh? What do you have to do to go up to the Habayis? You need to be tahar. Great. I got dial soap from America, extra white, and I'm also tahar. You know? In other words, the count is not an obvious thing. It's not like lighting the menorah, 1, 2, 3. You have to know when to count, when it ends, when it starts, what days count. Okay. Right, it doesn't just mean we don't know how to count past 5, even though could be we don't. Fine. But you ever take a poll of how many people make it to 49? Take a poll. How many people make it to day 7? You know? Okay. Archas Rabbeinu. Exactly. So, by the way, you have to, for Shiva Nekiyim also, for Shiva Nekiyim of Azav, you have to make a bracha. It's, what if you don't count one day? Could you continue counting? Halacha l'maisa. Oh, so now that we might be Azav, so let's come to the following question. Are you allowed to stick your fingers into the Kaisal HaMaravi? Now, people have this inexplicable urge that when they go to the Kaisal HaMaravi, they have to write a note to Hashem. Dear Hashem, I came all the way here. My team is in the World Series, and please. Are you allowed to write a note and put it into the Kaisal HaMaravi? A kvittel? Well, call it whatever you want. Are you allowed to? Now, here's the thing. Past the Kaisal HaMaravi is a Habayis. Does the inner space of the wall have the din of the Habayis? Or is it only mibifnem? Chazonish holds you're not allowed to stick your fingers into the wall. But I have to write a letter. I came all the way here. Guess what? There's something called davening. Davening, you don't have to write a letter. Okay? Chazonish says it is asur midairaisa to stick. Why? Because we might be azav. We might be. What about touching it? Now, touching it, here's the thing. They asked the stipler, touching it, sometimes the stones go out and sometimes go in. So if you touch it where the stones go in, maybe that's also considered bia b'mixas. So the stipler has a letter over here in the Archas Rabbeinu that he brings down. The Chazonish says you're not allowed to touch it. You're not allowed to stick your fingers in. So he says, they asked the stipler. Stipler says, in my opinion, yeah, if you went to the mikvah, you could stick your fingers in. If you didn't go to the mikvah, you can't stick your fingers in. Why? Because if you didn't go to the mikvah, you're Baal Keri. If you're Baal Keri, you can't go on the Habayis. But what if you did go to the mikvah? So then the stipler was mekel, to stick your finger in. But maybe we're a zav. We're not going to be choishesh. Maybe you're a zav to the extent that you can't stick your finger in. Why? Because the stipler says probably the holes that are in the wall that are coming to mi bachutz have a din of what is called mechilois hapsuchos l'chayil, have a din of the chayil. The tunnels that go to the outside have a din of the outside. So therefore the stipler paskin that if you didn't go to the mikvah though, you should not stick your fingers in. But I have to stick my fingers in. Pal, get over it. That's the halacha. You can't stick your fingers in if you didn't go to the mikvah. If you did, you could. Now, the question is, could you touch the Kaisal HaMaravi? Stipler says, Mistaber, it's mutter. Could you kiss the walls of the Kaisal? Could you kiss the walls of the Kaisal? Stipler didn't answer. No answer. The minhag Yisrael is we do it. There's probably not a problem because again, you're not sticking your finger in. So this is all because we're worried maybe we're a zav. Now we have to explain that. Why should we be choishesh for such a far-fetched thing? Isn't there a rule kol re'asa deloy chazinan loy machzakinan that anytime if you don't see a problem, you don't have to assume it's a problem. I'll give you a mashal where this comes at halach l'maisa. You go home. And you go into your fleshik drawer, and you find a milchik spoon or a milchik fork. What do? Is it treif or is it kosher? You hear this? You open up the fleshik drawer. I know it never happened to you, but they say in some houses, sometimes it can happen. You open up the fleshik drawer, you find the milchik spoon. The answer is you take the milchik spoon and you put it back in the milchik drawer. Do I have to kasher it? No. Should I kasher it? No. Why? Why yes? Why are you making problems? Kol reyes adoi chazinon loy machzikinan. You don't have to assume something else. But obviously, if it entered, I must have washed it. And the fact that you find it in the fleshik drawer does not ruin it. So too here. Why in the world, why in the world should I assume that a person is a zav? So we're going to get to that. Okay? Here's the next issue. The next issue is, look in the Gemara, the Mishnah Midos. Mishnah, Parak Beis, Halacha Aleph. Reb Zerlik, have a seat. Yeah? Parak Beis, after, okay? Parak Beis, Mishnah Aleph. Har Habayis, the Har Habayis hay chomesh me'os ama, chomesh me'os ama. Har Habayis is 500 amas by 500 amas. Rubai min hadarim. Now, this means the opposite of what you would have thought. The majority of the open space, where the mikdash is not, is in the south. Meaning, in the Har Habayis is the mikdash. The majority of the open space is in the south. Sheni loy min ha-mizrach. Second most is in the east. Shlishi loy min ha-tzafain. Third to the north. Miyutim min ha-marav. The least in the west. Meaning it's closest to the west. It's west-north of the Har Habayis. The mikdash is west-north of the Har Habayis. Okay. Makoim shahaya roiv midasai, sham haya roiv tashmishai. The place where most of the open space was, that's where most of the usage was. That being the case, so say here, it's not a problem. I'm going to go to Balkari. I'm going to go to the mikvah. Elamai zo, I'm going to go to a mayim chayim. Elamai, the issue, the complexities of counting, I'm not going to buy into that. I'm confident that I'm going to do a good job. I mean, that's not going to hold me back. Don't hold me back from the Har Habayis because of a chashash. I know how to go to the mikvah. By the way, now, when you're going to the mikvah, you can't do an Erev Shabbos, Erev Yom Kippur, plop job. This is tefillah d'oraisa. I mean, the same way when a woman goes to a mikvah, we put her through the rigmarole. We're going to put the man through a major inspection if he's going to go to the mikvah to cleanse himself from a chashash ziva, because this is tumah d'oraisa. The chatzitzos are going to be a problem. Whatever a woman's going to go through, a man's going to have to go through. But I'll do it. I'll go through it. But we're tamei meis, so I won't go through the chel. So I won't go to the chel. But that's assuming we know where the chel is. But the question is, do we know where the chel is today? After all, Rav Yaakov Emden writes that, let's see if we could find it. Rav Yaakov Emden writes that the Makom HaMikdash has been untouched and is in the exact same place that it once was. So maybe, if that's the case, we're going to be able to go to the Har Habayis and avoid the Chel. Well, it comes with Tzitz Eliezer in Siman Chelek Yud, Siman Aleph, Ois Samach, number 27 on your sheets. Says it Tzitz Eliezer, Ein Yitanu Yodea Adma B'Diyuk Makom Kodesh HaKadoshim. Not only do we not know where the Chel is, we don't know where the Kodesh HaKadoshim is. We don't even know where to measure. The Radvaz says that the Kodesh HaKadoshim is by the Even HaShsiya, where the Mosque of Omar is. Says, and from there we could calculate all the other measurements. Says it Tzitz Eliezer, that's the opinion of the Radvaz, but many argue. For example, in the Sefer Derech HaKodesh, he says today we don't really know where the Even HaShsiya is. Because some goyim say it's here, others say it's there, some say it's on the floor, some say it's on the ceiling. Everyone has a different story. We no longer know where the Even HaShsiya is. Says the Sefer Avodah Tama, do you really think where the Mosque of Omar is, that's where the Even HaShsiya is? If that's the case, why didn't the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah use that when they needed to determine where to make the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Why did they need Nevi'im? The answer is, just because they say the big stone is the Even HaShsiya, of course it's not the Even HaShsiya. Even HaShsiya is in the middle of the earth. Elamai, we have a tradition that there's a stone on top of it. How do we know which stone it is? The Vadai, says the Tzitz Eliezer, in the last 1,000 years, no credible Jews have ever been there, either for halachic reasons because of Tumah, or because the Goyim never let us. And therefore we have absolutely no tradition where the correct makom is, and you cannot assume that you're going to measure where the chel is based on the tradition of where the Even HaShasiyah is, because we have no true Messiah of where the Even HaShasiyah is. In fact, says the Tzitz Eliezer, when Tornus Rufus came and plowed the Makam HaMikdash, so what did he do? He unearthed it. He did Aru Ad HaYisoid. Let me just see if I can find. He writes something else here. Second. Okay, we're going to come back to number 17, where the Tzitz Eliezer writes. He says, when Tornus Rufus unearthed the Heichal, and he said those right, Aru Ad HaYisoid, many stones which were uncovered became covered, many stones which were covered became uncovered, and therefore we cannot act decisively until we have a Ruach Mimarim that shows us Baruch HaKodesh where the correct place of the Kodesh HaKadoshim is. Therefore, we need to be Choshesh in the entire 500 Amos by 500 Amos of the Habayis, that maybe that's a Kodesh HaKadoshim, and a Kodesh HaKadoshim, no Tamei Mesim could go in. Once you get to the Azara, once you get to the Chel, then the halacha is the Tamei Mes cannot go there. Now, there's a big curveball in this whole sugya. There's a major curveball in the whole sugya. Because remember we spoke out last week, well, let's see, what did Tzaddikim do for the last 2,000 years? So we said the Meiri says he heard the tradition is to go there, but we saw that the Minchas Yitzchak rejected that because the Rav Ashtori HaParchi, who was there, said no Jews go there. So we're not going to accept Eidos of Shmiya over Eidos of Re'iyah. But here's the major curveball, number 17 on your sheets. And it's quoted in its full version in the Shas Chuvas Minchas Yitzchak in number 18. And that is, let's go back for a moment to the year 4925, okay? We're going back like 850 years ago. And there was a man by the name of Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. And this is quoted in the Sefer Charedim by Rabbi Elazar Askiri in the Minchas Yitzchak number 18, at the 7th line, that the Rambam was B'tzar Gadol Ma'od B'yam. He was in great distress on the sea. And when he was saved, he accepted a tainus. And then after the tainus, he made it a yomtiv. And then the Rambam writes, and on Tuesday, 4 days into Cheshvan,
where are you reading?
Numbers 18, the 26th day of Yetzirah, I went from Akko, I went up to Yerushalayim, and I entered the Bayis Hagadol v'Hakadosh v'Hispalalti Bay. So we see the Rambam went to the Habayis. So that's all we need. We have a storybook. We have a story, and the Rambam went to the Habayis. So Marv Rabbi say, if it's good enough for Maimonides, then it's good enough for me. After all, the Rambam went to the Bayis Hagadol v'Hakadosh. Yeah, but we don't do what he says; we do what he does. And the Rambam went to the Bayis Hagadol v'Hakadosh. Says the Tzitz Eliezer, only a fool, a shoige or a pesi, would believe and take this at face value. Because otherwise you're making a mockery out of the Rambam. The Rambam says you go to Chayiv Kares, so you're going to take literally when he says he went to the Bayis Hagadol v'Hakadosh, that he went to the Harabayis, he went to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So there are a few ways to look at it. Either the Rambam knew where the Chel was, so he taka went to the Harabayis, and he went to the Mikvah, and he went to Mikvah Mayim Chayim, and the Rambam could cheshbon zich 7 days, and the Rambam knew exactly where the Chel was. However, says the Tzitz Eliezer, the Muslims came, and when they built up the Habayis, they completely destroyed the Habayis. Now, there's a historical fact. Because we know that when you go up to the Habayis, you're supposed to be, Eretz Yisrael is Gavaya Mikol Ha'aratzos. Yishalayim is Gavaya Mikol Eretz Yisrael. Habayis, and the Habayis is supposed to be the tallest part in Yishalayim. So why when you go to the Habayis today, you go down? Everyone did that? Why is the Habayis down? The answer is because the Muslims completely destroyed the entire Habayis.
The Romans
So
did too. The Romans did too. Hadrian did too.
Turnus Rufus also, or how do you say about it? The Tzitz Eliezer says, "Hechrivu va'aros arei yisoid es yisoidos hamakom sakdoshim ve'shchisu balos pnei karka beis hamikdash ve'hishvu es admasai." They flattened it. Ad shaloi noidu oidam et sam shem kosakosh. We have no idea what the boundaries are. No, at least we know from the western wall and the southern wall what the extremities of the Habayis were. But the Habayis itself, they flattened out. And therefore, we have no right to go anywhere there. Rabbi Yaakov Emden says, Habayis loy nishtanu kol ikar. He means, from the time of the Churban until his time, loy nishtanu kol ikar. But after the Muslims built it up, there's no question, they completely destroyed the place. Now, some want to say that this letter that Rabbeinu Moshe Ma'or HaGoyla wrote about his being saved on the Yam, and then ultimately going up to the Bayis HaGadav HaKadosh, some want to attribute that to Nachmanides. After all, his name was also Moshe. So the Tzitz Eliezer says that's incorrect. Why? Because we know the Ramban wrote a letter to his son, and in the letter he said he never went further than Har Hazesim. Don't ask me what the Ramban shul is. I don't know. I'm not sure. I can't tell you. I just know what the Ramban says, that he did not go beyond Har Hazesim. And not only that, the problem is the letter of Rabbeinu Moshe was dated. It was dated the year 4925. And the Ramban was not born until 4954. And it's very difficult to write a letter 29 years before you're born, says the Tzitz Eliezer, and therefore there's no way that letter was written by the Ramban. It must have been written by the Rambam. And Habayis HaGadav HaKadosh either is a big shul near the Habayis, or the Rambam was, the great synagogue, exactly. Or the Rambam was able to be Zahir, he knew where the Chel was, and he was able to be Zahir. Bottom line, the Minchas Yitzchak says that the Mechadshim, I guess the innovators, they want to say that you could go up to the Habayis, and they are toileted on this letter of the Rambam. And basically, the Minchas Yitzchak says, Nishka Shtayvin, Nishka Floigin, Laihayav Lainivra, Laidubim V'Layar. The Rambam never went there. When the Rambam says, Habayis HaGadav HaKadosh, there is no way that it means the Beis HaMikdash, because he brings from other Kadmoinim that talk about the Bayis HaGadav HaKadosh in reference to shuls that were in the vicinity. Plus, says the Minchas Yitzchak, the Rambam uses a lashon nekeva when describing the Bayis HaGadav HaKadosh. He says that we should be zoicha, just like we davened in it b'chorbana, we should be zoicha to daven in it b'nechamasa. But we know when we refer to the Beis HaMikdash, we refer to it b'lashon zachar. We say Bayis HaGadav HaKadosh shenekra shemcha, a love. But when we refer to Yerushalayim, we refer to b'lashon nekeva, v'sishkain, v'seicha. So clearly, if the Rambam is referring to it b'lashon nekeva, this was not a reference to the Beis HaMikdash, but rather to Yerushalayim in general. And therefore, ve'echi tachen, masha kasav l'halacha l'maisa. There is no way that the Rambam would have gone to Habayis, and his own Talmud, the Kaftar Vaferach, said, you're now to go there, and the minhag is not to go there. And therefore, concludes the Minchas Yitzchak. No, it's an interesting share. V'chein amadavar. Lehiskarev, le'inyan tefillah, v'hishtachavoya. Halach l'maisi, you could only go up to the wall, to the ksalim, im haya eza mamish ezreim shavah, el al karchach, lo'idubim v'layar, this is a made-up story, v'chol deverim tolem al blima, ubetem v'lotalem, l'shiurim l'kayam, basically it's a bunch of nonsense. The Rambam never went there, and halach l'maisa, Minchas Yitzchak says, you're now to go there. Okay, this is really what I wanted to get to. Because there is a legend, and the legend is, and this legend is brought in the Sefer Sharei Yerushalayim, number 28. And in the Sefer Sharei Yerushalayim, there was a great officer and official and very prominent individual by the name of Sir Moses Montefiore, who legend has it that in the year 1827, when Moses Montefiore visited the Holy Land, that he went up to the Habayis. Now, Moses Montefiore was a tzaddik. He was a very righteous individual. In fact, he's responsible for us having ownership of a lot of Eretz Yisrael today. Now, he was not always as committed to observance as he was in the end of his life. In other words, he didn't necessarily start out that way until he came to Eretz Yisrael in the year 1827. Now, Moses Montefiore lived a very long life. He lived over 100 years. He lived from 1784 to 1885. He came from Livorno, Leghorn, and he came to London. He was a stockbroker. He had an excellent client, and that is Nathan Rothschild was his client, and later his own brother-in-law. So they married sisters. Moses Montefiore was an imposing figure. He was 6'3", very tall man. And he actually prayed in Italy, in London, in the Bevis Marks Synagogue. So I was just in London, and I got a very interesting brochure celebrating 300 years of the Bevis Marks Synagogue. And I want to thank my good friend Jason Joseph, who was able to bring us here and get us access into this synagogue. This is the oldest synagogue in London. And in the synagogue,
It's not in use.
which is still in use. In fact, we met the rabbi there, who was the rabbi in the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue in Manhattan, and then he took the job there. And actually, when he presides on special occasions, he wears the ancient costume that the levush of the Spanish-Dutch synagogue. So it's like a Hamburg turned up hat with a black robe. And if I'm not mistaken, right over here was the seat of Moses Montefiore. He davened in this shul in London. And he went up to Eretz Yisrael in 1827. Now, in many ways, it helps to be wealthy. Wealth is a very big test. Some people do not pass it. But if those who are able to, he was born in 1784. He retired in 1820. So, and I read in one place he retired at age 40, other places he retired at age 36, and he dedicated the rest of his life. We're talking about 75 years for Tzarchei Tzibor, for Tzarchei Klal Yisrael. But be it as it may, after he visited Eretz Yisrael, he became very strict in Diktuk HaMitzvos to the point that he would travel with his own personal shoichet. So he was a very sharp man, a nobleman. By the way, he was knighted by Queen Victoria, who he befriended her when she was 5 years old. I believe her mother had passed away, and Montefiore befriended Victoria when she was 5, and later on she knighted him and was able to help promote good relations with the Jews. So he was a very sharp man. So he once met a nobleman. So the nobleman said that he just returned from Japan. And Montefiore, guess what? In Japan, this anti-Semitic nobleman said, in Japan there are no pigs and there are no Jews. So Montefiore said, you know what? Maybe we should both go there then. Anyway, the thing is, when Montefiore came to the Holy Land, he went up to the Habayis. He went to the Habayis.
The little stones on the top of the wall, he actually put them there because they were throwing rocks.
Oh yeah? Okay, I'm not familiar. I didn't know that.
Plus to make it
Marv Rabbeisai, the rabbis in Eretz Yisrael were not happy with him. The Rav of Yerushalayim was Rav Shmuel Salant. He reprimanded him. Who else was in Yerushalayim at the time? Do you remember we learned last week on Wednesday when Rav Meir Orbach came to Yerushalayim, so he, so to speak, became the Avbezin of Yerushalayim. They were goyren by. They reprimanded him very sternly. However, there was a Rav in Yerushalayim at the time, Rav Yosef Moshe Milisa. Rav Yosef Moshe Milisa was the son of the Nesivais. And not only did he reprimand him, he put him in cherem. He blew the shofar, and he put Montefiore in cherem. Now, Montefiore was a very righteous, genuine person, and he sincerely did not know you were not allowed to go to the Makam HaMikdash. He thought you weren't allowed to go there because the Arabs didn't let us go there. So basically what he did was he paid everyone off, a sum they couldn't refuse, and he was one of the first people who was ever allowed to go there. He didn't know that halachically, because none of the poskim said you're not allowed to go there halachically, because it was a non-issue. It's like, nobody's going to write shuvas, It's a halacha l'maisa, nobody should go to where ISIS is. No kidding, So they didn't have to write shuvas about going to the Har Habayis. But he was able to pay everyone, and he sincerely told Rav Rabbi Shmuel Salant and Rabbi Meir Auerbach that he was a shaygeg. And they said, don't worry, okay, we're makabel. He said, but he put me in cherem. So he said, don't pay attention to his cherem. He was a big kanoi. His cherem, Rav Moshe Yosef's cherem, has the din, Yosef Moshe's cherem has the din of chermei hayam. There's an expression in the Gemara, the traps of the sea. So we have a lot of yams today. Rachel is yam, Rav Yosef Moshe, Milisa is yam. Yeah, a lot of yams. Anyway, they said, don't be goyres his cherem. So if you look in the Tzitz Eliezer, number 28, he brings the story of Moses Montefiore went against the will of the Jews. They told him not to go. He didn't really think they were serious. He didn't think seriously, halachically, you weren't allowed to go there. Now, the Tzitz Eliezer brings down that when Rav Shmuel Salant came to Montefiore, Montefiore was really crying. He said, I really didn't realize that you weren't allowed to go there. He thought it was only because... And he says, then Rav Shmuel Salant and Rav Meir Auerbach screamed out against those who wanted to put him in cherem. In other words, they sort of defended him and released him from his cherem. So Rav Adya, in the Yabia Omer, has a whole maracha. Should he be in cherem or should he not be in cherem? Meaning halachically, if someone does an avera and they didn't know about it, okay, you reprimanded them, but they're a shoygeg. Can the person be in cherem or not? So Rav Adya says, ube emes, now, so Rav Adya wants to say, and many people make the mistake, well, if Rav Shmuel Salant and Rav Meir Auerbach sort of released him from the cherem and told him not to pay attention, so doesn't that mean that they supported his ascent to the Habayis? Or Rav Adya said, no, they didn't support his ascent. They just held that he shouldn't be in cherem because he's a shoygeg. And Rav Adya brings many, many rayas that if somebody does something b'shoygeg, they should not be put in cherem. Plus, an interesting halacha. You ever hear the expression v'hakesef yanes hakoil? There is a halacha that someone who gives a lot of money to yeshivas, you don't put them in cherem. Doesn't mean they should be honored at the dinner. There's a difference. I'm not saying just because the guy's an oispar, if he gives a lot of money to yeshiva, I'm not saying he should be up on the podium. But also, it doesn't mean you have to put him in cherem. It's a raya from the Gemara Pesachim. The Gemara Pesachim Don Gimel Beis says there was a man by the name of Toidos Ishromi. We're in number 29. Yabia Omer Chilek Kesim and Chav Zayin, second column, fourth line, that he would support Tamei Chachamim, and therefore they did not put him in cherem. And therefore, Rav Adya says they were just. That was a reason not to put Montefiore in cherem. But what about the following? Now, this is a very interesting thing. Let's say a guy says, I know the Rambam says you're not allowed to go, and the Ravid says you're not allowed to go, but I want to be soymech on the Ramban. You ever hear the thing? I know you're not allowed to chves, do X, Y, and Z on Shabbos, but I'm sure somebody says you're allowed to do it. Right? You ever hear that expression? Well, I'm sure someone says you're allowed to do it. If a minority view says you're allowed to do something, is a Yid entitled to say, I want to be soymech on him? No. What are you? An Avarian. What do you mean? But there's a Shita. Yeah, a Shita is b'shas hadchak. It's a very extenuating circumstance. But just because you want to do something, what is that called? That's not Judaism. That's, worship of oneself. You have to follow majority view. You can't follow minority view. If someone follows a minority view, will we put them in cherem? Yes. Let's say a guy says, I'm not saying this is the case. Brushing teeth on Shabbos. You got to brush teeth on Shabbos. But Moshe says you're not allowed to. Most poskim say you're not allowed to. I know there are some. I'm going to follow that posek. Well, why? Is your Rebbe? No, because I want to. Okay. So will we put someone in cherem? And I'm not saying that brushing teeth falls under that category. I'm just giving an example. But if somebody follows minority view, will we put them in cherem? Well, says Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, that Reb Chaim Falaji says no. And Shiur Knesset Agdola says no. But Rabbi Yaakov Emden says yes. And I say yes. Says Rav Adya, my opinion, we will put someone in cherem merely for following minority. Well, put him in cherem, but he's following a legitimate opinion. But we don't paskin that way. You're not entitled to do that. And therefore, don't say they didn't put Montefiore in cherem because he was following a minority view. That's not a reason not to put someone in cherem. Bottom line.
So how does that work with
Elu Divrei Elokim Chaim is, they're both MS, but doesn't mean you can follow it. There's a psak halacha. Elu, they both have an element of truth. They both have certain, yeah. No, there's psak halacha. Psak halacha means you're allowed to do A, you're not allowed to do B. There's an element of truth to it.
That's your girl.
Marv Rabbi say, bottom line is, the Stipler wrote a letter where he sort of enunciates the mainstream view about the Habayis. He says, Kai Malon, in number 30, Shagam Achar Chorban Beis HaMikdash, Loi Batla Kedushas HaMakam, the Kedush is not Batal, Va'avai Noira Va'ayim Hulikanis Sham B'Tama. It is a terrible sin to enter their B'Tama. Why? Because B'Zanazek Kulanu Tumei Mesim, and therefore B'Hanichnas B'Harabayis, in the Machna Shechina, you're Chayiv Kares. That's what we started off with. If you enter what is called the Machna Shechina, which is... Yeah. Which is the Chel. Someone who enters as a Tamei Meis is the Chayiv Kares. Now, that only precludes you from the Machna Shechina. However, says the Stipler something very interesting. There are tumas that asur in the whole Habayis. And there are those that you need Shiva Nikiyim. Svira Shiva Nikiyim, you need Tefillah B'mayim Chayim. Says the Stipler, Bizmanenu, we don't know how to do that. Who could say, and here's the Vart. You're right. There's no reason to assume someone's a Zav. But the guy's 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years old. Who's to say that one time in one's life one did not become a Zav? It is reasonable that we need to suspect that one time in one's life a person became a Zav. And even if you go through all the steps of Tara, says the Stipler, anu hachnisa larabayis afilu b'tara avayin plilihu. Why? What do you mean? I know I'm not a Zav, and even if I am, I went to the mikvah mayim chayim. Because you're machti es harabim. Because the rabbim will see you're going, and they will go b'li tara, without the proper precautions. And then says the Stipler, a very frightening thing. If I were to ask you, what is the biggest sin in the entire Torah? Tumas mikdash v'kadashav is the biggest chait in Kol HaTorah Kula. Why? How do we know? He quotes a Tosefta. Kasha avoin tumas mikdash mikol averos shebetorah. And therefore, chayva, and I'm going to read to you the Tosefta. Chayva al achenu b'nei Yisrael mikol hachugim. Whatever camp you belong to, whether you're Hasidish, Yeshivish, Sfardi, Mizrahi, Chardal, Daiti, Lu'umi, a mix of both, you're not here, you're not there, and whether you don't know if you're coming or you're going, you're Breslov, you're Hasidish, you're Litvish, you're Quasi, you're mixed up, you're confused, whatever you are, you're not allowed to go there. Hishamer me'alois bahar unagoya b'katseo. Says the Stipler, it's enough the chatam that our dar does, we should add to it. Let's daven at the Kos HaMaravi and be zoicha to the Bias Goyal Tzedek. That is the letter of the Stipler. That's how the Stipler concludes, but I'm not concluding yet. And the Minchas Yitzchak likewise, in number 31. The Minchas Yitzchak also says that Chas v'shalom to be Pirates Geder, the minhag is not to go there. But then there's another argument, and many argue as follows. Many argue, but wait a second. What kind of kavod, what kind of prestige is it for the Jewish people that we're going to let the holiest spot on earth go into the hands of our enemy? How could such a thing be? What, isn't it a chilul Hashem to give the Makam Harabayis to the enemy? So I'll tell you something very interesting. In one of the first books, should I put it on camera? Whatever. One of the first books that Rabbi Victor Miller wrote, he went to different publishers, and they said, great book, just take out this paragraph and we'll publish it. And he said, no. And what he wrote was that it's a hashgacha pratis that Hashem gave over the Habayis to the Arabs. Why? Because they guard it. Who do they guard it from? From us! They make sure we don't go there. Now, Think about it. He could have given it to any religion, but if he would have given it to another religion, they would have put their icons there, their avodah zarah there, and they would have defiled it. They would have come with their women who are not dressed properly, and they would have defiled it. So Hashem gave it to the Yishmaelim, who make sure there's no avodah zarah there, and even more importantly, they make sure the Jews don't go there. And that was a special hashgacha pratis and chesed from Hashem. But that's an interesting thought. But be it as it may, is it an honor for the Jewish people that we don't have access to the Habayis and we don't go there? Says Rabbi Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, quoted by the Tzitz Eliezer, number 32, Chelik Yud, Siman Aleph, Ula Inyan, on the second paragraph, on the sixth line, Inyan Kaved Uma, La'aniyas Daiti, Yoiser Haya Kaved, it would be a greater honor, Im Nishtado Sheyimsu B'Yadenu, B'derach Kinyan HaChatzeros, Hasmuchos LaKoisel, better build a big shul next to the Kaisel and build a tremendous edifice. It could fit thousands of people as a testimony that we anticipate the great day that the Beis HaMikdash will be built. You know what the greatest honor to the Jewish people is? You know what the greatest Kiddush Hashem is? The greatest Kiddush Hashem is to follow the halachos shenimsru l'Moshe Rabbeinu b'Sinai. And just the opposite. What kind of tiferes is it to Klal Yisrael to go against the Roiv Rishonim who say that we're not allowed to enter there Bizman Hazeh? And let's just take a look at number 24. Let's just take a look at number 24, where the Tosefta says, frightening news. Number 34. Okay, you're listening. Hayi Reb Shimon Omer, Kasha Tumas Mikdash v'Kadashav Mikol Aveiro Shabbatayra. We're not dealing with a small thing here. This is the most Chamer Aver in the Torah. Shekol Aveiro Shabbatayra Miskapros B'Sayr Achas. All the other Averos, you bring one Sa'ir on Yom Kippur and they're all forgiven. The Tumas Mikdash v'Kadashav, you need 32 Se'irim. All the Averos in the Torah Miskaper once a year. Tumas Mikdash v'Kadashav every month. To teach the most chamor avoin in Kol HaTorah Kula is Tumas Mikdash v'Kadashav. By the way, so let's end off with this. 1967, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, upon hearing the news that Har Habayis biyadenu, so he went to be mavara the sugya whether we're allowed to go up to the Har Habayis b'zman hazeh. By the way, he writes about Montefiore, and this is one of the rare times I ever saw Rabbi Ovadia write. I heard when I was young, and he doesn't quote a source. Look, I can't tell you everything Rabbi Ovadia wrote, but usually he was very into quoting the source. If you look at the end of number 29, he writes, Kimedumali, that he heard that when Montefiore went up to the Har Habayis, and with his Rebbe, Rabbi Dr. Levi, he was carried in a carriage by Goyim. And Montefiore was told that the Tumah of the Har Habayis, David HaMelech, is only Mekadesh from the Ritzpah until the Tahaim. But the Avir is not Tameh. Now that's also a Shaila. So bottom line, are we allowed to go to the Har Habayis today? And if you're not allowed to go, could you take a helicopter ride on top of it? Could you take a private jet? Could you take a hot air balloon? Meaning, was Montefiore correct? If that is in fact true, which Rabbi Ovadia writes, that Kemedumali, he says, the Montefiore was carried, does the Tumah, is it boilate? Could you fly over the Har Habayis? So, look at number 35. Hamur mikala amar shahadin noisik, we passing like the Rambam. Kishur shan, kishur shab, kishur asavat, labai. V'lechein also, yikan izan zemakam ha-mikdash. Ve'asur latos u'larachafe u'larachef b'matois b'masoik. You can't take a plane. You can't take a helicopter. Why? Mibnei shahakadusha chala gam al avir ha'azara ad l'rakia. You're not even allowed to fly over the Har Habayis. Should you tell people about this, or let them be ignorant and mutav she'yishoigigin? Says Rabbi Ovadia, mitzvah rabba lefar seim ha'isser. It's a great mitzvah to publicize this and tell the rabbim. Why? Because we're dealing with the most chamor isser b'chol ha'torah kula. And therefore, says Rabbi Ovadia, L'chein bevadai, yesh lehisrachek, ulehishamer, shaloi lehikanes Har Habayis, ends Rabbi Ovadia, afilu achar tefillah. It's not going to help to go to the mikvah. You could go to Arizal's mikvah, you could go to the Skvara mikvah, the Vizhnitza mikvah. No mikvah is going to help you. Why? because the rabbim are going to learn. You went to the mikvah, they're going to go into the sprinkler, and they're also going to go in. Nimnu v'gazru v'gamru v'hiskimu gedolei hadar b'chol toikef. It's unanimous, says Rav Adya. Ligdar geder ulahazer b'azhar chamura leval yehein shum adam li'ikanu shetach habayis. Until when? Until maybe an hour from now. Ki yavoi shiloi, when Mashiach comes. And then we'll be Zoich of Zarakti Aleichem Mayim Tarim. So let's just conclude as follows. The truth is that throughout history, there have been Matirim. Who are they? The Radvaz. And I believe the Derech HaKodesh. They allowed it. But in the past generation, like as Rav Avadia says, Nimnu v'gamru v'skimu kol gadolei hadar. Be it the Minchas Yitzchak, be it the Stipler, be it Reb Avadia, be it Reb Tzvi Pesach Frank, be it Reb Shmuel Salan, be it Reb Meir Orbach. Nimnu v'gamru, either because we have to be choishesh for a ziva, or we have to be choishesh for a mechusa kippurim of ziva, and we have to be choishesh that we don't know exactly where the chel and the azara is, and for all of the above reasons, one should not go to the Habayis. One should remind and warn their friends that we don't go to the Habayis. And in Mirza Hashem, we should all be Zoicha very soon. Lalois, B'tzion, Larina, Yishalayim, B'simchas Olam. Shkoyach.
You go to the restaurant? Is there a restaurant still next door to it?
I don't think so.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.